talk for hours.
Yeah, we could. Hi, everybody. Hello. We are live. It is Kathy Frey here from IMCO. And yeah, I can start to see those numbers coming in. And good morning and good afternoon and good evening, depending on where you are in the world. And so welcome to this IMCO Maternity Natural Health webinar that we're having. And of course, IMCO is the International Integrated Maternity Healthcare Organisation. And I'm Kathy Frey, the founder, and welcoming today Winton. So say hello.
Hi everyone, thanks for
Wait.
having me, Kathy.
Yeah.
And I'll try to set up a
And
beautiful sunrise for everyone today, but it's foggy, so I apologise for that.
yeah, I can see we've got some Melbourne fog going on there.
Yeah.
And it looks like it might be a little bit brisk, but we might have some sun coming through in the next little while. So welcome everybody to this webinar, and we'll just give it a few minutes as people are signing in. And please do go into the chat and let us know where you are in the world and what your role is. If you're a health practitioner, birthing professional, mum with an expectant tummy, so let us know where you are in the world. That would be wonderful. And also just a reminder to everybody that down the bottom is that Q&A button. So if you do have any questions for Winton, please do type them in there and we'll absolutely make sure that we get through them all. So today's format is going to be a bit of a sort of a casual chat. And we've got some topics that we're going to be going over and some questions that I want to ask Winton. But as I say, feel free to throw your questions in there too. And so just want to, hopefully we've got a very good turnout for this today, I must say. I think that the topic of induction is one that we're all kind of passionate about. And so I just want to give you a little bit of an overview of Winton, because he came into this topic from a very different direction than most of us. So he began his career in sports medicine on the back of his life as an aspiring Olympic athlete. We have to tell us more about that. Winton was unaware he would spend the next 18 years using his skills and knowledge in human performance to help couples establish labour in a controlled and natural manner. And he's had over 5,500 induction sessions under his belt. So we've got a lot of wisdom sitting there, including high risk, prem, multi-pregnancies, and really could say that Winton's style has transformed dramatically over the course of his own career, which he'll tell us more about. And he voluntarily discontinued from his formal medical registration in 2014 to pursue what he believes uh, could be wonderful future for the birthing community worldwide. So this will be the first time he's spoken publicly in 6 years. And I know you were feeling a little nervous about all of that, but I'm sure it'll all come back. So welcome. And let's just have a look quick in at the chat. And we've got, where have we got? We've got Boise. And Emily Boise from Canada. Welcome. And we've got more from, we've got some Melbourneites here.
Yeah,
I can see that. And some midwives and student midwives coming in from New Zealand and whatnot. So look, welcome everybody. And I know we've got a lot more people signed in than have gone onto the chat. So look, just welcome wherever you are in the world. And I think what would be really great, Winton, if we could sort of just begin with that whole question of, you know, what led to the shift in your career? You know, what was the reason that you shifted, you know, from sports medicine and somehow ended up in that topic of the natural onset of labour? That's a big switch.
Yeah, it is a big switch. Yeah, during my late schooling life in the sort of late 80s, I was actually rowing. So I went to a private school here in Melbourne. And as an aspiring athlete, the Olympics is always kind of the goal. And for me, it was
And what
actually
we have to ask, what was your sport?
rowing.
Right.
Yeah, I was a rower. So, and I was shooting for the Barcelona Olympics in 1992. Now, literally, by the time I got there, I'd had a few, because I repeated a year at school, I sort of ended up out of age for the sort of state titles that I was actually running for. I was about a month too old. So by the time I got to that Olympic level, I was kind of, or that Olympic sort of selection level, I just had enough of the sport. I'd sort of fallen out of love with it. When you train twice a day, 6 days a week for 9 years, not only do you know yourself incredibly intimately, but it's work, and it just became work rather than actually something that I was enjoying doing. So not knowing really what I was going to do, I went overseas, went to America, got into natural medicine in America, came back and started practicing, and naturally just went into the sports medicine sort of field. So I was working with two guys that one was looking after the pro golf tour. One was looking after the pro tennis tour. So he's actually the chiropractor for people like Ivan Lendl and Mark Philippoussis. And working in that clinical environment, while I was expecting that people would be very much like myself and looking forward to natural performance and all sorts of things, you'd find that they were more prepared to spend thousands of dollars on new equipment or whatever to maybe gain seconds within their times, rather than spend maybe a couple of $100 and actually rest more and gain minutes. Just the whole mentality for me was really different.
Wow.
Because while I was
interesting.
while I was doing Chinese medicine, I practiced Qigong, which is like Tai Chi. I've become really, really stressed through my later schooling life and through my rowing sort of career, and I wanted to do something that was a bit more wholesome. So through Qigong, you learn how to slow down, you learn about your energetics. I actually resolved my back issues by meditating. I imparted the same training regime into my meditative practices as I did in my rowing. And really started to have this really deep, intimate level of understanding of my body. Now, within the clinic, while I was expecting this sort of sports element, what I kept getting, because I was a young practitioner, is everyone else's throwbacks. So everyone else, they're trouble people. And Chinese medicine often works on layers. So you start at the surface and you work your way in. And it just consistently came back to conditions that people had when they were kids that had never been resolved. And, and we're dealing with really major things going on. All the abuse stuff, whole gamut of different things. And for me, it just didn't make sense to be dealing with them in their 30s and 40s, when if I had have had access when they were in those childhood years then and there, their life could have been different. So within that, within literally 2 months, the naturopath in the room beside me came in and asked whether I'd do an induction for one of his clients. I just took it on, said, yeah, I know it can be done, but I don't know what's involved. Book her in, did the research. Second session, the morning after, she had her first baby in 8 hours with no interventions or anything. She's the first client that's ever rang me back. The minute she came home from hospital, she rang me up and told me about the story and just started actively referring through Mother's Group, and it just went from there.
Wow.
Yeah.
So fascinating. And you'll obviously talk to us today about, so it also stemmed from word of mouth, and you've obviously learned so much over the time from, your first client to your 5,500th client. It would be interesting to hear, about some of the techniques, and how that sort of all works. What are the sort of fundamentals from your perspective in this science? What's the fundamentals that are really required for that natural onset of labour?
when you train, you sort of learn about, particularly from Chinese medicine, because it's a different mindset to the Western way. And I've actually had to learn how to integrate both because of my heavy involvement with the hospital system. So I've had to learn how to communicate one, a Chinese medical perspective from a medical perspective. But you learn from a Chinese medicine perspective, it's essentially taking the uterus from an organ that's in a holding perspective and turning it into one that's in an expulsive perspective. That's what labour is. So gestation is this period of holding, which is one of the cycles of the uterus, and then birthing is actually about it opening up and expelling. So it's an excretory process, essentially. So things like blood, we talk about qi and blood. Qi is basically the body's energy, which gives the motive force to push. Blood's required for nutrients, sustenance, and suppleness and softness of the cervix and stuff like that. In a medical sense, blood's required for the provision of oxytocin because that's how it gets there. Without a decent blood supply to the uterus, you actually don't get the fuel for contractions. That's how we're trained. But what happened in 2004, was that I'd done enough inductions to start seeing that really the Chinese medical method was only about a 50-50 success rate. And when you're involved with the hospital system and you're dealing with doctors, they love to cut you down, and being competitive by nature, you don't want to go there. So I had to really think about things and just start kind of working out different ways of going about stuff to get better results. I wanted a better result than just 50-50. And of all things, at home in November of 2004, 2 of our cows actually had babies, or had calves in our paddock. Didn't know they were coming. There was no drama. There was no nothing. We just woke up in the morning. One had twins. One had a single calf. And I just sort of looked at it and went, after all the things I've been going through in clinic, why can they do that? And I didn't even know what was going on. Yeah. Where's the evolutionary cycle here? Yeah. So I knew that there was something sort of more natural and more innate that was kind of going on. I was seeing the stress that was going through people's lives in that birthing process, but I hadn't really kind of worked out how to deal with it. In 2005, I met Sarah Buckley at a book launch of Gentle Mother, Gentle Birth. And the key thing for me at that stage was the whole aspect of the most profound thing she actually said was that all mammals need safety and privacy to give birth. Now, relaying that back to the paddock situation, the cows, there was no pressure on them, there was no nothing, they just did their thing. Whereas when you look into people's innate family lives, getting pregnant it's like a button for people to start renovating their houses. It's a button for life to start changing. And often what you find is that, the families themselves or the couples get to the sort of the birthing period and life's just too busy. There's too much going on. So what started to happen from that point on was that, I really started sort of shifting the way I was dealing with things, not only to work on people's physiologies, but also start actually calming them down and getting them more centered and just getting things more relaxed.
And do you think that if you kind of were looking at, how you had a 50-50 sort of success rate up to that point, do you think you could almost, draw a line in and say, well, in a way that 50% that were the non-successful, you could see that they were the more stressed people, or, could you see a correlation, a pattern emerging for when it didn't work or when it did work?
No, it was really interesting because I was doing such a huge volume. It was really an interesting profiling period. I'm a huge people profiler because you'd see 2 couples almost identical in terms of fitness, physicality, lifestyles, so on. One would do brilliantly well and one would fail dismally.
Right.
And it just makes us to step back and really have to think about it. And so what ended up happening further down the track is particularly about 2007, I started to really see a lot of anxiety for certain people in certain situations. Anxiety is actually a heart condition in Chinese medicine, and the heart rules the blood, governs the blood vessels, and pumps the blood. And it also houses and sort of governs your spiritual body, which is your non-physical self. But heart stuff isn't necessarily dealt with particularly well in, I mean, it's really well understood, but it's not dealt well with in Chinese medicine in a quick sense, which a birth, I might have someone who's being cesarean or having a Caesar the next day, and I've got 1 hour to get them to where they want to go. So you have to sort of remove a lot of different paradigms and go to really different levels to shift people quickly. And so, it comes back to those things that have happened to people and the conditioning people have had as they've grown up, where, there's doubt involved, there's insecurities, there's relationship issues, there's a whole gamut of different things that you've got to sort out very, very precisely, very quickly. And working with the doctors, the thing that kept coming forward is they, particularly if they had to leave their offices, they'd walk out saying, we've got to keep adrenaline out of this. We've got to keep adrenaline out because adrenaline inhibits oxytocin. Now, for me, sitting there listening and watching, I'm watching the clientele come in stressed. I'm dealing with the hospital staff who are coming to me. They're all stressed. Even the doctors are stressed. But they're sitting there saying we've got to keep adrenaline out of it. And it's sort of like, this just doesn't make sense. No one wants...
It's like everybody's got the theory and nobody's doing the practicality of it.
Exactly.
So give us an idea of, tell us about what it is that you do or were doing. So were you using, what sort of different therapies were you using and how would you use them?
I was originally purely trained as an acupuncturist. I then did a postgraduate in Chinese herbal medicine, which worked really well. And it was a really integral part of my learning process because I was able to just go through the steps, step by step, almost work through the manual of how a person works from a Chinese medical perspective. And, you work on this thing of, no, I've got to get them working better, like in a physical sense with my sport. You've got to be stronger, got to be fitter, got to be, your blood systems have to be better with, it's all this sort of upness. A car, vehicle's got to be stronger and stronger and stronger. But then when you start dealing with the stress scenario and the anxiety scenario, not only within myself during my career, but within people with their birthing scenarios, you find that they're not only seeing you, but they're seeing a naturopath, they're seeing a chiropractor, they're dealing with their other kids, their friends are telling them where to go and what to do. And it just, all the therapies actually became really, really stressful. Even me supplying herbs for them, they don't like taking them because they taste terrible. They've paid for them. So they end up in this dilemma of, he's telling me to take it, but I don't want to take it. And it just ends up this stressful process. So in the end, compliance became a real issue, particularly with the herbal medicine side of things. So I just went, I don't believe at this stage I've seen someone in a Western world who's not physically capable of giving birth. I've had people, faint on me on the tables regularly. And still birth brilliantly. So their blood pressures are really compromised, but they still can actually go through the natural birthing process. They just do it in their own way. So you kind of go, nature actually knows, people know how to do it. They just don't do it differently.
So what did you...
Well, what
So if you were seeing clients, what did you do then?
What was that, sorry?
When you're seeing that non-compliance, you're saying, take this, take this, take this, and then they don't. So then what did you do from there?
What I basically decided to do was that part of my need for them to comply to what I was doing was creating pressure for them. And rather than the therapy being the benefit, the pressure was actually being the inhibitor. So it really became about this thing about rather than putting your foot on the accelerator and trying to drive the whole process forward, we actually needed to take the handbrake off and get rid of the thing that was actually stopping it, if that makes sense. So if you, for example, take a handbrake off in a car, it'll naturally roll forward. It can now move. It can open up. And
so
so
how would you accomplish that in a practical term? What did you do differently?
Basically, what I started to do is manage people's lives. One of the things that I have experience in, and when we started having kids, I actually started working in the building industry full time to cover my wife's income. And the building industry teaches you how to just literally build things, put things together. And structurally, you're kind of looking at people's lives going, okay, well, I've got to keep adrenaline and anxiety out of this, and everything's just a mess. So I've got to come back to the fundamentals. And at this stage, I was also starting to work, I'd sort of return back to the more spiritual aspects of practice because I really needed to deal with that heart sort of anxiety aspect. And so what I did was I shifted the mentality more into a framework of looking at it going, well, she's a female, he's a guy, the husband's the partner. They've both got intrinsic things within them that are power aspects. You know, she can nourish life and give birth. He can't do that. Women have an on button. Their function fundamentally is to nourish all life under all circumstances. And my wife had taught me that women will always typically hope for the best, but always prepare for worst. That's so you can always function at the worst scenario. For us as guys, that doesn't make sense. Whereas a male will live in off mode. We switch on, we switch off. We typically are off. So if you give a guy an opportunity, he'll just switch off and go and do something fun.
Yeah.
So, but intrinsically, the child is a product of both of them. You know, when you work clinically, midwives are, and I apologise for maybe this angle, but midwives will always say they're the best ones to look after the lady during birth. But it was actually the husband that made the connection in the first place. It's the husband that actually got the oxytocin back in the first place. So if he can do that in that scenario, he can do it at the other end of the cycle, which is the birthing process. And fundamentally, if safety and privacy is the issue, it's the husband that organically will give the most safe and private aspect because he's got that intimate relationship. So
you'd really sort of sit down with the dads and the dads to be and guide them through, I guess, them getting empowered to feel, because a lot of the guys don't, you know, they hesitate to sort of come into that role sometimes. Some are fantastic naturally, a lot are hesitant. You know, they don't want to do the wrong thing. And so how does that all, so take us back to, I'm trying to think of the things that are practical advice that we could give our birth practitioners that are watching today. So talk us through,
I normally draw it down, but I can't because it all comes back. I tried yesterday and it all comes in reverse on the screen. So I've got Mary Jane with us today, who's our practice buddy. Now, if Mary Jane's the mum, she needs to be safe and private. So she needs to be protected. Okay. Now, being a birthing mum, we have this saying in Chinese medicine that where there's flow, there's no pain. Where there's no flow, there's pain. And a pregnancy is actually a pathological accumulation in Chinese medicine. It's actually a fundamental disharmony. The birthing process is actually clearing that disharmony. So you need to open up and allow things to move. Now, for Mary Jane,
that's a very interesting philosophy on it, because, you know, so often we talk about the woman being pregnant and of good health, but she's not of her normal health.
No, it's a fundamental disharmony.
Right.
So Mary Jane needs to be safe and private. She needs to actually be in a safe and private space, first of all. So she needs to be protected. Secondly, to recognize what's going on, she needs to be focused. She needs to actually feel what she's feeling. She needs to be centered. She needs to be focused. And to get the baby from being inside to outside, she actually needs to be open, not closed. Now, that's her job. Now, if she's not safe and private, she'll protect her space because she knows that up until physiologically, the body seems to know up until 9.5 centimeters, it can literally switch off, stand up, and walk away. But once it hits 10 centimeters and starts transitioning, it's absolutely out of control.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's like an exam. If you know you're not prepared for that exam, the closer you get there, the more stressful it becomes. And as it becomes more stressful, the adrenaline levels go up. So if Mary's job is to be safe, centered, focused, and open within that safe environment, it's the husband's job to actually create that safe environment.
Right.
Because males protect and provide. And
Yes.
the interesting thing about guys is we don't actually have we're not emotionally aware, we don't really care. We tend to be non-judgmental about it. If she asks for something, he'll typically just not question it and bring it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a matter of getting this dynamic working properly where she actually knows what it is that she needs and she's actively communicating it to him and he's hearing it and actually respecting it. When that happens, you get a couple that works really, really, really consistently well together. Because at the end of the day, the whole birthing process, there's only one centered aspect of the whole birthing process, and it's actually the couple. Because they may switch departments, they may have staffing shifts, there's a whole heap of different things that may change around them, but they're the only consistent thing through the whole process. And for me, it's not necessarily a matter of having a natural birth, as the absolute force that you have to look for. It's making sure that if you go from a family birthing centre, even a home birth scenario, right through to a caesarean, it's about keeping the same dynamics going because as Holly was talking about 2 weeks ago, what the baby experiences through this whole process actually sets its hormonal levels for the rest of its life. It's what governs its perspective of the world.
Okay. Oh, fascinating. Just fascinating. Now I've got a bunch of other questions I want to ask you.
Yeah.
So let me just have a look at my little notes here because I don't want to miss anything out today. So tell me, what is the relevance to the trimesters and the Western, wisdom of the Eastern philosophy?
Yeah.
Can you overview that?
Okay. When you conceive it, Western medicine or normal thought process tends to be linear. So you go from one point to another. Eastern philosophy is all about cycles. So essentially, if you think about conception up here, you go through the whole gestational period, and then birth is basically the same point on the cycle. You need oxytocin to conceive, you go through your cycle, you need oxytocin to birth. It's almost like the start of the period is the end of one cycle and it's the beginning of the next, and it just keeps going around. To conceive, you need to be open and receptive. So the uterus needs to open up and receive to conceive in the first place. It needs to be able to do that. The mother needs to essentially be able to let go. And when you have sort of life issues come into the place, it can be really hard for women to actually open up and be receptive. Because the minute you get pregnant, you actually know that your body knows your cycle is going to go on and where it's going to go. And as parents, we kind of know we don't really have control over a lot of those aspects. So if you struggle with control and vulnerability issues, you don't tend to allow yourself to go there. Second trimester is about accumulating and basically consolidating. And then third trimester at 28 weeks is a process of then starting to open up, to let go. And it's much easier to hang on than it is to open up and let go. Okay. So what you often find clinically, particularly with things like pelvic instability, is it tends to come up at about that 28-week mark. Working in sports medicine and working on the physical side, I kept seeing mums come at about 28 weeks with pelvic instability. that's a scenario often where you start to open up and they become uncentered. They start to lose their fundamental energetic center. And because of that, they actually then start to hold on, particularly through that sacral area, if that makes sense. You know, if everyone's producing oxytocin and everyone's producing relaxin, and relaxin softening the ligaments, why do some people have the problem and some don't?
Right.
You know, so you have to look deeper. And I started looking deeper and started seeing these fundamental similarities in the sense that there would be this family issue or this trust issue or something was going on in the background. It's like a little virus in the background of the computer that's just bringing up this issue. The further down your gestational period in that last trimester you go, the more open you become. So essentially, the more vulnerable you become. As that happens, there needs to be much more support. Now, ironically, one of the things that happened in my time was that while there's studies done now, you know, things like anxiety and so on, which is things that I was learning about, and you'd see people and you'd educate people about the negative impact of anxiety, and they'd actually start to become anxious about being anxious. It's like being stressed about being stressed because you know it's a negative thing.
Yeah.
And so you're actually amplifying the problem. So in the end, after realizing what was going on, I started sort of changing my viewpoint and going, no, look, it's fine to be anxious, because if you're anxious, it just means we're not doing our job. So I want you to actually communicate that anxiety so that we know you're anxious and tell us why, or give us more feedback so the picture's clearer. Once that's happened, many hands make light work. If you allow us to work for you, that's governed by the husband, because he knows what she's going to accept and what she's not. You know, people bring what they've got to bring, but it's not always necessary. So, and it can be overwhelming if you get a large family. You know, they just bring everything, and it's often not needed. So the husband will normally sit there and go, well, I know what we want, and I know what we don't want, and he'll actually act as almost like a filter that allows what's required in and keeps everything else away.
Oh, and when they do, I mean, it's fantastic. And yeah, I absolutely hear you on that. When they do, I actually call it them acting as the bouncer. Yeah, and I'd often talk to the dads and saying, you know, this is your role, but and in that protection. But I love the fact that you commented about, you know, if the women are feeling anxious and then they go, oh, I shouldn't be feeling anxiety and stress, that's bad for the pregnancy, and you get more anxious about the fact that you're feeling anxious. And it's like, maybe us as health professionals, we should sit there and kind of say, you know, chances are you may be feeling anxious and, you know, you're right on track, and that's okay. But tell me, what are the things that you are most anxious about? In fact, you make me recall a situation when, before I was a midwife, when I was heavily pregnant with my first baby, and my birth practitioner looked at me square in the eyes and goes, tell me your 3 biggest worries.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was like, about the birth, and I was like, okay, I'm scared about forceps, and I'm, you know, and I don't like the idea of an episiotomy, and you know, so it was great to actually have that moment when somebody respects the fact that you do obviously have some anxieties, and maybe sometimes in our busyness we can feel like we've got we're trying to tick off all their boxes, and sometimes you just need that moment to really confront their issues. Tell us, talk about the indigenous cultures, fundamentals of that human energetics. You know, I'd like to understand a little bit more about what you were doing with your clients.
Okay. For me, one of the things I struggled with, particularly at the later aspects of my schooling life, is this. I've never thought the same way as everyone else was around. I just haven't, for whatever reason. I've grown up in the bush, grown up trout fishing, just seen a different world, basically. Now, when it comes down to the birthing scenario and so on, and it came down to essentially sorting out my own life post-secondary school, I actually went to old cultures because it was consistent, it was stable, and it just made more sense to me. Now, there is that African saying that says it takes a whole village to bring up a child. And what you consistently see clinically is people come to you and you go, okay, he's working flat out to pay the mortgage and pay this and pay that. And she's about to have this child and potentially going to be breastfeeding 3 times a night. And so who's going to support him, or who's going to support you both? And people come to me saying, well, we don't have any support networks. What about friends? Oh, no, we're new to Melbourne or otherwise. In Indigenous cultures, the grandmother would typically teach the mother how to birth, and the mother would teach the daughter how to birth. Mm-hmm. When the birthing process is coming on, the family starts cooking food for them. The uncles and the brothers start helping the husband. It all comes together and everyone's working together.
Yeah.
Often when you listen to what goes on in people's lives, that we have mothers groups and things like that, but often when people find out you're pregnant, they start telling everyone their horror stories.
Oh, I know. Yes. I think all birth practitioners, yeah, that's a really frustrating aspect. In fact, I'm aware of a few years ago of a midwife who did her master's to do with the whole birth horror story. And in fact, I'll throw something in there. I remember discussing that with my own mother, and she said that there was 3 things that back in her day you did not discuss. Yeah. And you did not discuss your sex life, you did not discuss your mortgage, and you did not discuss your births. And yeah, which it's kind of crazy, right? But I mean, if you're going back to that sort of 50s and 60s, and in a way that protected the woman, whereas I know that when I was a 24/7 on-call LMC, I had a really high normal birth rate. Yep. In comparison to the sort of average statistics in the area. And I would often have to sit down and debrief with my woman and say, look, I know you've had the most fabulous birth, but there's going to be a whole lot of people out there that really don't want to hear about it. Because they'll be going, oh, you're so lucky you had that birth. Oh, my birth was this, and this, and it ended in that, and blah, blah, blah. And I would say, look, the reason that you've had such a beautiful birth, it's not luck. It was because we did a lot of planning around that. There was a lot of strategy went into that. Yep. And, but you quite often I would find my clients could be literally the only couple in their antenatal group that had a completely normal birth.
They can't talk about it. They can't
talk about it.
That's
and
great.
The ones that do have the right seemingly to talk about it is the more complicated and horrible it is. Yeah. So the horror story is an incredibly destructive part of what's going on for our mums to be.
The community, absolutely.
And they're not around seeing normal. No. And of course, for most women giving birth, it is the first birth they've ever attended in their life. Yeah, it's very tricky. So what do you think are the absolute fundamentals that are required for that natural onset of labour?
It's literally establishing safety and privacy, irrespective of what that means. It's got nothing to do with herbs. It's got nothing to do with acupuncture. I can honestly say over the period of time that I've been in clinic, I've stopped as many labours as I have started. The amount of times I've been called out to a home birth because someone's not establishing labour and gone, yep, I'll be there, get in the car and leave with all of my gear, then get a phone call while I'm in the car saying, oh, she started contracting. And you go, oh, okay, what do you want to do? Look, I'll keep coming. I'm coming anyway. So I turn up, I walk in the door, and suddenly there's this new person in this space. Who is he? What's he going to do? And suddenly it all stops again. Why? Because I've actually threatened the space. And the reason why she started in the first place is because she knows help's coming and she's relaxed. It's as simple as that. So what ended up happening was that through talking to my clients and actually establishing that network properly, I found that they wouldn't even make it into the clinic because I'd already established the fundamentals through the conversation that we'd have pre-session, and they'd end up going into labour before they came to see me. So to give you one example, I had one of the latest births that I did was a mum having a VBAC going to one of the hospitals here in Melbourne. Really difficult cesarean the first time. She started coming to see me at about the 34-week mark. By 36 weeks, she kept being told, look, you're not engaged. The baby's sort of going nowhere. We need to start thinking about book you in. We want to book you in for a seizure at 38 weeks, which they booked her in for a seizure at 38 weeks. And so I'm now looking at going, okay, well, we're kind of getting there, but she's now got this carrot dangling out in front of her as to where she's going. And I kept saying, no, don't focus on that. We're not there yet. 37 weeks, I rang her up just to see how she was getting on because she had an appointment at the hospital. Look, the baby is engaged, but they've told me I'm not in labour, and and she was really dejected and so on. And it was just like, oh, okay. And at that stage, I sort of said to her, well, maybe you need to come and see me in the clinic. And she just stonewalled me on the phone. It was like, no, I'm not going to come. I give up. And I was just about to hang up on her and just go, look, that's fine. Ring me if you need. I was just about to go, look, I can't help you, and just hang up. And I thought, oh, I can't leave her like this. I said, well, what are you feeling? And she goes, oh, my legs are really sore. Like I'm really sore in the legs, which is a blockage. Pain comes from obstruction in Chinese medicine. And I said, well, that means you're blocked. Why are your legs sore? And she said, I always feel like I need to wear the pants.
Sorry, say that again. It
And I'm
went a little bit funny.
like I'm hanging on so I don't wet myself. She had pain. Sorry, she had pain in her legs because she was hanging on because she felt like she wanted to wet herself, wanted to pee. And I said to her, well, do you reckon you could wet your pants in public next time it happens? And she went, oh, no, probably not. And I said, do you think you could do it at home? And she went, oh, yeah. And I said, would your husband be okay with that? She said, oh, absolutely. I said, if you can, next time you get that urge to pee, I just want you to let it go. But don't stay out in public, stay at home. Do you think you can do that? No worries. And I said, look, if your body's trying to shift something, you might go through this period of just getting really tired after it. It might go on for a period of time, then it might stop. And as you integrate whatever needed to shift, you'll typically just get tired and want to go to sleep. I get a phone call, I get a text message the next morning saying baby so-and-so was born in really just obscure scenarios at 9 a.m. or it's something like 2 a.m. Last night. I'll ring you when I'll get out of hospital. And I'm like, God, that's really full. I'm like, what happened? She rang me a week later just giggling, absolutely hysterically laughing, going, God, that was really weird. And I said to her, did you do the pee thing? And she said, yeah, I went and got in the shower and I actually peed for about 45 minutes. It just kept coming, kept going, kept coming, kept going, kept coming. And then as you said, it just stopped. So she said, I got out, I got changed, I went and had my dinner. And then she said at 9 o'clock at night, just like you said, I got really tired. I just sort of went, oh, I just need to go to bed. Gets into bed. She woke up at 2 a.m. desperately needing to push. She hasn't had one contraction. They ring the ambulance. The guys in the ambulance actually medicated her because they didn't want to do the paperwork so that she'd make it to hospital. And she'd had the baby within 5 minutes of being in hospital. That's
wow.
That's the sort of stuff. It's just about actually supporting them.
Crazy, amazing stories.
15 years ago, I would have gone, look, you need needles and you need herbs and you need this. Whereas mum's actually telling me what she needs. All I need to do is just listen to her and help her do it. And physiology, the body
Sorry.
knows what to do.
It's about just listening to whatever those signs and symptoms are that
Yeah.
the body is already trying to tell you, which you're not listening to.
Yeah.
So what do you think are some of the common traps for couples in that pre-birth period?
Most people just get too complicated.
Right.
It just gets way too complicated. You know, my friend says this and this and this, and it, or, you know, they're seeing different people for the right reasons, but typically they'd come to me going, this person's saying this and this person's saying that. And there's no sort of integration of that knowledge. So they suddenly become confused. And because there's now this level of trust but confusion with it, they don't know actually what to do. And because they now don't know what to do, the safety and privacy mechanism has just been completely broken down.
Right.
They've actually become vulnerable because too many people have told them too many different things.
Oh, absolutely. Information overload
Yeah.
or data asphyxiation.
Yeah.
Now we've got a comment coming through, which is a really, valid comment, just to do with more to the LGBT community, and we're talking of that traditional, the male husband partner. But of course, we do have a much broader situation now, and of course we've got solo mums as well. And so, how do you, what's your adjustments to that, or how do you?
Women are really, I've had a huge amount of working through fertility with LGBT relationships and so on as well. And it basically, women are really, really emotionally sensitive towards each other. But what often happens is when they're birthing, they get so sort of intimately connected with the feelings and so on that the birthing mum can often start worrying about their partner because they're sort of so involved in that actual aspect.
Oh yes, I've definitely seen that. Yeah, where they do, like she's worrying about him worrying about her, sort of thing, and that will inhibit her. Yes, if she can see he's being anxious. But do you see differences, or when we've got a broader spectrum of partners?
You have to change the roles a little bit. So sometimes you end up in a scenario where the non-birthing partner has to just maybe step out a little bit and behave maybe a little bit differently. Not in a non-natural sense, just in a guided sense of, yes, come in and rub and support and so on, but sometimes you actually really have to step out of that. Or conversely, if you're going to start feeling overwhelmed because you're actually sensitive to that person's things, tell them where you're going and actually remove yourself out of that situation, because it can become distracting, essentially. Women will inherently know, a female partner will inherently know what her partner's going through, but often finds it really hard to separate from that.
Right, because
we've got that.
Because women have this increased sensitivity for women in a way. So there's a different dynamic there, and there's not a right dynamic or a wrong dynamic. And I think that, the fact that we started this conversation talking about male partners, I don't want anybody to interpret that we're not inclusive.
I don't
not at all.
No.
But it was really more that we are talking about that stereotypical. But obviously there's so many different dynamics and so many different situations. But I guess what you're saying is there is a different male energy and female energy, and there's different strengths and weaknesses that we sort of naturally have in that. So I don't want anybody, heaven forbid, feel that we're not being open to that, not at all.
I apologize for bringing forward maybe a sort of a strong discussion in regards to that, but it's more about the yin and yang aspect, where you've got a nourishing aspect, which is the more female aspect, and you've got a yang aspect, which is more a protective, expulsory aspect. Irrespective of what's going on, if you're creating safety and privacy, whether it's a male and female partner, two women, that sort of dynamic needs to be stabilized and balanced effectively. That's all. Even
Yeah.
if you've got a single mum who doesn't have a partner, which I've seen before too, I normally try and bring someone in for them. I had one mum who, after I talked about the safety and privacy thing, burst into tears for an hour and a half because she was actually going through a separation from her husband literally then and there.
Yeah.
And so because he was a non-option in that relationship, I actually brought her dad in as the person who was going to hold that space. But rather than behave like a father, he actually had to behave like a husband. So he literally had to not give his opinion. He just had to do what he was told.
Right.
And it
And
worked
I
brilliant.
always sort of say to these partners that, you know, when she is in labor,
Yeah,
she is the center of your universe.
absolutely.
And
No one else.
it really doesn't matter who that is. And, you know, I've seen, I think that over, you know, when you are attending hundreds and you'll get thousands of births, you know, you do see all those very interesting dynamics. But, and you can see sometimes you get partners, doesn't matter, married, not married, irrelevant,
Yeah,
male, female, not
yeah,
that relevant. But you see some partners where you really, sometimes I kind of might think in the antenatal period, gosh, you know, I don't know if this person's going to make the most
no,
wonderful birth support person there is. And they totally surprise you because they actually are so amazing on the day. And then sometimes it's the other way around, where you kind of think as you meet them antenatally that they're just going to rock it, and
yeah,
actually they don't on the
yeah,
day. So look, I think it's been very, very interesting. Perhaps, you know, the big sort of takeaway in this is that even though you had all that training in acupuncture,
yeah,
and you had all that training in Chinese medical herbalism,
yeah,
and you had all those births that you attended, at the
yeah.
end of the day, you could see that you could do all of those things, and it's not going to make a difference if that woman is not in that safe environment. And
No, because
it's like that is actually, so more than anything else, for that natural uh, and for her naturally to go into labor, it's like you've decided that is the number one priority,
yep,
is her feeling safe.
you'd often see them. You get your clientele starting to contract in the clinical rooms, but literally within 10 minutes of leaving, they'd stop. And so you go, well, hang on, your body was working. What stopped it? Or they were contracting and then they'd go into hospital and they'd stop when they're in hospital. And you just go, this doesn't make sense. Why did your birth stop when you went into hospital? And you'd come out and there was some dynamic that had played out. And it's just like,
Yeah.
oh, fix the dynamic and they'd start again.
Yeah.
So,
I think that it brings home the point that we should be working so hard. And I think, you know, midwives particularly and doulas do work sort of so hard to sometimes to try and create that atmosphere. You know, if you're in a hospital rather than say a birth centre or a home birth, you know, you can't help but be sort of surrounded with bells and whistles and clinical and the smell of the place and everything else. But there certainly is so many things that we can do, little things that we can do at the time, and you know, have some aromatherapy going, have some music going, turn the lights down, you know, take the mattress off the bed and put it on the floor. I mean, there's things that we can do, and I think sometimes we know about it, but sometimes we forget about it. And the busyness of it all, particularly with shift working midwives, where you are having to look after multiple different clients, in comparison to, you know, say the self-employed midwife independents where they're looking after that one client. Yeah, it's really tricky, but very interesting that after all those years of you being in that work, it became such a clear answer to you.
yeah. Look,
That
working.
is actually fundamentally what we must do.
Yeah,
Almost, it takes us back to the red tent.
it does.
Right, and creating that that absolute environment more than anything else.
Yeah.
Oh, we've got a question in here. Have you got a recommendation for a lady with multiple sclerosis giving birth? Any particular comments on that one?
Sorry, I'm just trying to feel my way through. No, that's a really interesting one. I'd probably have to. Multiple sclerosis can be a multitude of different things on an energetic platform.
Right.
It's probably one of those things where I need to just have direct contact and actually have a discussion about it, which I'm more than happy to do.
Ah, okay.
You know, so that I can work through what she's personally experiencing, so that we can sort of just, I mean, sometimes you just literally have to work it out as you work through.
Okay. Well, Sharon, who sent that message through, if you want to drop me an email directly, and I can give you Winton's information, and you could potentially, you two could connect. So that is cool. Well, look, we're running out of time, but I just, is there any, if anybody's got any other last minute questions, feel free to send them through. And Winton, is there any last commentary that you'd like to wind up with that we haven't quite covered off on?
No, I think for me, the reason why I moved beyond what I was doing, or actually discontinuing my registration, which I think's kind of where I'm wanting to go in the future, was because of the fact that for me, I actually stopped using all of the products and all of the training that I was using. So it had become sort of superfluous to my needs, because it was so important to create that correct environment. And interestingly enough, working directly with the Royal Women's Hospital here in Melbourne, having a building background and understanding building dynamics, my thought process was, well, if we can build things that way, why can't we build them differently? Because you're right, the smells, the sounds, the whole context of our environment, it just doesn't make sense as to what's required.
Right.
You could have it really medicalized, because medicine, without a doubt, is required, but it can cater for a completely different experience as well. You can actually put the two together, which is why I sort of extended into, looking into music and recording and just creating the actual atmosphere that's required, so that when people come in, rather than it being stressful, it's actually supportive and relaxing. But then what they need on a medical level and at a therapy level is also available. It hasn't been an easy process. I've got a whole heap of ideas. And actually creating the physical space, I don't believe is hard. It's actually just generating the change of consciousness and generating the support network to actually have it come forward. That's been the challenging thing.
Right. And just normalizing it as well. When I would be the, sometimes I feel like I'm literally the only midwife, at birthing suite who has got some aromatherapy going and some music going and the lights are down, and you're kind of like, this should be just normal, and it's just normal. Everybody walks into a birthing room with a woman in labor, and that's always what it's like. Because it's tricky doing that whole balance between the fact that you're in a hospital and things have to be medicalized. But look, it's just been really lovely talking with you today, and thank you for everybody who's attended as well, because obviously without you guys here as the audience, it would just be Winton and I just talking to ourselves. And we appreciate you all taking the time to be here and to pass through your comments. And we work hard here at IMCO to just everybody works as a volunteers, and we're doing our best to just help spread this information of integrative maternity health care. And so thanks for your time, Winton, and thanks for the time, everybody who's showed up today. And we're going to wind it up, and we wish everybody a wonderful rest of your week. And thank you very much, Winton.
A pleasure. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.